Thanks for joining us once again here this morning, and in advance of Father's Day, which is next Sunday, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about Father's Day. Those of you who listen to John Hancock on WBT know he does his Father's Day tribute early in the year with a pancake breakfast and all, because he commemorates his dad essentially on the day his father passed away. And he's been doing that for years. And fortunately, I'm blessed to have my father still in my life, and that's a wonderful thing. And I'm greatly blessed to have had that influence throughout my life. And I wanted to talk to somebody who's done some research and really looked into the issue of fathers and the raising of families. And you may remember Dr. Warren Farrell, we spoke with several months ago here on Carolina Focus, author of The Boy Crisis, along with Dr. John Gray. And they looked at how boys are being raised these days and the issues that they're facing. And I'm probably going to put some words in his mouth. I hope he doesn't disagree with me on this. But I think part of the boy crisis is also kind of a father crisis as well. Dr. Farrell, welcome back to Carolina Focus.
Thank you very much, and you are absolutely on target. When I started doing the research for the boy crisis, I expected that I would come up with a number of causes, and I did come up with 10 separate, distinct causes for the boy crisis. But then, as I looked at them more closely, one cause after the other was an outcome of a lack of father involvement. I saw the boy crisis is in all 63 of the largest developed countries in the world, and the most developed countries were allowing for much more permission for divorce and much more permission for women to have children without being married. And in those two groups, divorced and women having children without being married, there were a very high percentage of boys who had minimal father involvement or no father involvement. And it was in those two subsets of boys, the ones with minimal and no father involvement from divorced parents or from moms having children without being married, that the boy crisis resided. In a sense, the boy crisis resided where fathers did not reside. And so I then began looking at, why is that? What do fathers do that lead to children doing so well when they have a lot of father involvement and so poorly when they don't? I didn't realize it was that big of an issue. And as the more closely I looked, the more I was able to identify 70-plus different areas where children who are what I call dad-deprived do significantly worse than children that have, or that I call dad-enriched, that have a lot of father involvement. And so I then started asking myself, what do dads do that lead to children doing so much better when they have significant father involvement? And so that took off on something that really allowed me to very much honor our fathers on Father's Day.
And I guess you've got 70 different areas of deprivation that are impacted by the lack of having a father in the life of a boy. In particular, is this just for boys, or do girls suffer as well?
And it's a good question. Girls do suffer as well in almost all of those 70 areas, and then in some different areas. They just don't suffer to the degree that boys do. Boys, when a girl has a mother but no father, at least she has a female role model. The boy without a father has no male role model. The girl today also has very clear social messages saying, you can be whoever you want to be. You can be a full-time mom. You can be a full-time worker. You can do some combination of both. You can rotate them in your life, and we will honor you. Boys, if they're, say, married and a middle-class male, and they're married to a middle-class woman, and the woman becomes pregnant, the woman says, well, I can work full-time, I can do children full-time, I can do some combination of both. And the future father says, I can work full-time, I can work full-time, or I can work full-time. And so we live now in an era of multi-option women and sort of no-option dads. And so oftentimes boys don't feel when they're growing up that they have a sense of purpose that like they used to have. They have a purpose void. It used to be when a boy was born, he was trained fairly quickly to become a potential hero by being a warrior and going to whatever war that generation had, or alternatively to being a sole breadwinner. Now there are not as much need for as many warriors, and there's not as much need for a man to be a sole breadwinner to define himself as a male. And so when he doesn't have a clear mandate from the society as to what to be, the good news is he doesn't have a clear mandate, so he has freedom. But the bad news is that without a father to guide him through the maze, to make the best of that freedom, he often feels purposeless and rudderless, and he doesn't have the boundary enforcement that fathers tend to bring. The boundary enforcement teaches boys to have postponed gratification, and the postponed gratification is the number one cause for boys being able to be effective doing their homework, doing things that they don't want to do, rehearse the routines on a basketball team to be able to be a star on the basketball team and get the praise and the pleasure from that. And so boys who don't have that postponed gratification are usually boys without father involvement, and those often become boys who don't do well in school, become depressed, and in worst-case scenarios commit suicide at much higher rates, become opioid addicted, drug addicted, and in the very worst-case scenarios become our school shooters or our ISIS recruits.
We're talking with Dr. Warren Farrell here on Carolina Focus about fathers and Father's Day. And I want to ask you a question, and maybe I don't know if this is a chicken or egg question, but not having fathers in the picture, is this because men are more irresponsible, or is this because women are more independent, or is there an interfacing of those two ideologies that has created this situation? Is there a starting point for how this all got going the way it has?
Yes, there's a lot of causes of it, but all around the world there are fathers groups that are fighting to be more involved with the children. There are no fathers groups that I'm aware of that are fighting to be less involved with the children. And so there really is a gap here. We have the women's movement did a very good job in expanding women's options to do whatever their personality was oriented toward, whether raising children or raising money. But no one came along and said boys need to be able to raise children, raise money, with the same flexibility and the same honor that girls and women do. And so we honored the career and we honored the warrior, but we didn't honor the father warrior. We haven't even introduced the concept of a father warrior, and a young man who learns to be a caregiving personality, who is willing to overcome all the barriers and discriminations against the father, walking into a park at 12 noon in a weekday and having a little 5-year-old boy with him, and the fact that the other women that are in the park are not really inviting him into their group to talk, and maybe are suspicious of why he's in the park with a 5-year-old boy that may be his son, and the looks and the exclusions, and dozens of other messages that in an era where we've gone from father knows best to father knows less, and almost all of the advertising on TV where a father is portrayed, if somebody is portrayed as a jerk, it's never the mother alone, it's always the father alone. That is 100% of ads in which only one gender is portrayed as a jerk. It is 100% of the time a male, and oftentimes a dad. And so we're not inviting fathers into being honored and being told they're needed and wanted. We're not allowing fathers to to study, we're not encouraging fathers to study what they contribute to the checks and balances of parenting that are important to the children, that lead to children doing so much better. So we don't know, for example, that fathers are as responsible for this as mothers, meaning that this is not a woman's fault. Millions of women are working their butts off, working as hard as possible to juggle their life to raise their children, and we dads are not immersing ourselves in understanding what's the contribution of roughhousing. So the result of that is, for example, and the result of that is that the mother looks at the father who's roughhousing and says, I just have one more child to monitor here, whereas the dad has been saying, sweetie, when you roughhouse with a child, the evidence shows that this helps the child know when roughhousing goes too far, when to stop. It helps the child, and here's the data, to show that it helps the child distinguish between being assertive and being aggressive. Sweetie, meaning my wife, this also helps the child feel bonded to me. When the child feels bonded to me and excited to be with me, I can say things like bedtime is 9 o'clock, and whatever time at whatever point you get your homework and your chores done, between then and 9 o'clock, we can do fun things together again. And because of the bond, I can set those boundaries and enforce those boundaries without the child feeling resentful, but only the child focusing on what she or he needs to do, get the homework done or get the teeth brushed or the chores done, and in order to get what she or he wants to do, which is to have more excitement with me. And the result of that is that the child feels more encouraged to do that postponed gratification, and that's why the father doesn't say. That is one of the reasons why children being raised with predominantly with dads, only 15% of those children have ADHD problems or learning disability problems, whereas 30% of children raised predominantly by moms have ADHD problems or significant learning disability problems. And so there's something that I'm doing here that is more than meets the eye of an irresponsible roughhousing dad. And that's just one of 10 examples of the difference between dad style and mom style that the culture is not being taught to appreciate. And so I found that as I was doing the research for the boy crisis, that I really had to articulate what those differences in style are, so that dads can share those with their wives, not to dominate their wives, but rather to do what I call checks and balance parenting, where the father can appreciate the protection and the nurturing and the sensitivity that the mothers usually bring to the parenting table, and he can also contribute the encouragement to go out of the comfort zone, to deal with teasing, to know how to be adventuresome, to take some risks but not too many. And when parents communicate effectively about these two things, that's when children do so much better in these 70 different areas that I mentioned.
Dr. Farrell, I want to back up for a minute because you made a comment and a reference to advertising, and where it's universally accepted that if ineptitude is to be shown in a commercial, it's inevitably the male, predominantly the father figure. Why is that? Is that a situation that has come about because we have this idea that in society there are winners and losers, that life is a zero-sum game, that if someone looks good, someone must look bad, that the idea of a win-win situation has kind of been tossed overboard? What's the motivation and what's the psychology behind the feeling that we have to put somebody down in order for somebody to look good? At least that's how I interpret these advertising
No, that's
schemes.
Absolutely the case, and and the reason that has become, first of all, the underlying psychology is that we have to put somebody else down in order for us to look good. That's all a fighter mentality, meaning that the way we got societies to be willing to go to war and to be willing to risk death is to say we're good. The enemy is all terrible, and exaggerate the evil of the enemy and exaggerate the virtue of ourselves. And that allowed people to have the dopamine stimulation to get the energy up to fight as a team, and to make the other bad. So with men and women, this moved into a different realm. The good news of feminism is that they opened up many doors for women. The bad news of feminism is they took an enemy approach. They followed the, and I say this as having been on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women.
I was going to say I wanted to make sure that people understand that you're not coming at this as just some guy who has an issue with now. You were involved with the National Organization of Women from its inception, virtually.
Exactly. I was for many years. I think it would be fair to say, the world's leading male feminist. I spoke all over the world advocating women's issues, and the degree to which they help my daughters to be much more have opportunities in this world that girls my age when I was growing up did not have. I bless that part of the contribution of the feminist movement. But one of the ways that they got there was to demonize men and to undervalue the family. And the demonization of men was very understandable. It came out of we evolved from the civil rights movement, where we had the oppressors, the slave owners, and then the slaves. And then Marxism had the oppressors and the oppressed as well. And so the early feminists were very often Marxists and Leninists, and Lenin very much felt the family was a patriarchal institution which made men have advantages over women. And they completely misunderstood the family, in which neither the issue was not domination by patriarchy. The dominating force of the family was the need to survive. And both moms and dads didn't have rights. They had responsibilities and obligations. Our moms made sacrifices of their careers. Men made sacrifices in their careers. The road to high pay is not a road of privilege. The road of high pay is a toll road, a road that requires you to spend, if you're a taxi cab driver, 60 to 70 hours a week driving that cab. If you're a coal miner, risking your life and risking getting lung cancer. If there's a war that's coming, you learned as a man you were a hero if you joined that war and risked your life and maybe were killed. Well, training yourself to be killed is not exactly about privilege and power. But the feminist movement took the obligation and the expectation of our fathers and grandfathers to earn money and turned that expectation and obligation around and demonized men as having privilege and power for earning more money, rather than saying thank you for earning the money and making that your contribution to the family becoming secure and your contribution to the family having a better life than you ever were able to have, and your children having more options and opportunities than you were able to have. Our moms and dads did exactly the same thing. They made sacrifices in the expectation that their children would have more options and a better life than they would have. And the feminist movement created a win-lose situation in which men were seen as having privilege and power and women were seen as being the oppressed, when in fact we were all in the same family boat. We all made different types of sacrifices for our children to have a better life.
And we're talking with Dr. Warren Farrell here on Carolina Focus about the importance of fathers. And you talk about the career choices that that men make. I was doing some research for a different topic and looked at the fatality rate, mortality rate for various professions. And in one of the statistics from the U.S. government, it compared, the statistical death rate in employment between men and women, whereas women, it was something, it was like 0.5 death rate, whereas with men it was almost 4.0 as a fatality rate in the workplace. So I think this kind of goes to what you're saying as to men making choices about their careers, and the thought that triggered the comment that triggered that thought was when you talk about going into the coal mines. We don't see a lot of women in commercial logging, yet that is one of the highest, most dangerous professions you'll ever see.
You're absolutely right, and there are many jobs. We say, well, maybe men are more oriented to having the physical strength to be in coal mines, but there are many jobs that women can take, like truckers or like cab drivers. And if you go into your next Uber or Lyft or your cab, you will notice that there's about an 85% chance that the person who's driving will be a male. Actually, it's a little bit over 90% with Uber, and you ask that male how many hours he works per week, and he'll usually tell you about 70 hours a week. And if you ask him, well, are you doing this because you have more privilege than women do? And are we preventing women from being Uber drivers? No, women just don't want to drive that many hours per week to make money to support their children. They do it in different types of ways. They make sacrifices, but the male is not doing these things that women can do in order to have privilege. It's not a privileged position to drive that Uber. But when children come, fathers do make more money than mothers do. By the way, men do not, as a group, make more money than women do in the workplace. Fathers make more money than mothers do in the workplace, because when children come, women are more likely to devote their time to the children, or to juggle their life between the children and the workplace, whereas the fathers are more likely to focus on the obligations of earning money to be able to compensate for the additional amount of children that are needed to be supported, or the less work that the fewer hours of work that women are doing in the workplace. And so those men, fathers, are earning more money. And then instead of the feminist movement saying, we want to honor you, dads, for earning more money so that we could spend more time with our children, they say, more men are in charge of businesses, more men are running the government, therefore they have privilege, and not looking at the fact that 99% of men, that even those men are usually working 70-ish or so hours a week to obtain those positions. And when we ask them, what would you like to do? The Pew Research Center did ask that question for the first time in history, and found that 49% of full-time working men who were asked who had children, who were asked would they prefer to be full-time working with the workplace, or be full-time with their children. 49% of the fathers said, I'd prefer to be full-time with my children, but I can't because I have to earn money. That's not about privilege. And so we need to appreciate, I think, on Father's Day, that oftentimes dads gave up the glint in their eye to be the artist or the writer or the painter, the actor, in order to be what they felt they needed to do, which was to give up the glint in their eye to focus on a different glint in their eye, which is their children and their wives.
And I think, and this is, I'm going to get a little personal and anecdotal here. I know in a previous career life that I had, I was traveling about 3 weeks out of the month, and with 2 children. And my wife was, she was also employed, but she never traveled. I mean, she was there with the kids 7 days a week. And I look back at those years, and at the time I thought, well, this is what I need to do to provide for my family. I've got this opportunity to, be in the corporate world, and it's going to require a lot of sacrifices and being on the road and travel, leaving the house on Monday and not getting home until Friday evening and that sort of thing. And I look back at that now, and I can see just how destructive that was in the life, particularly of my son.
Yes.
I'll make no bones about it. It was something that, like you say, if I could take that back and change it, I probably would, because I see how things in his life and how his attitudes were by my not being there to support my wife and his mother in his upbringing. That's
absolutely, and there's so many men that feel that way. I think I you may have, remember reading in the Boy Crisis book where I talk about a story of my, there was always a part of me that felt, well, men who spend full time as dads, maybe they spend full time as dads because, they really can't make it in the world. And then I met a man at a party once some years ago who came up to me and said, I joined a men's group. I used to form hundreds of men's groups around the country. I joined one of the men's groups that you formed, but you form these groups and then you go on and you form other groups. And so I joined after you had left the group that I joined, and it changed my life completely. I said, well, how so? And he said, I've spent, I realized that my heart had always been broken by the fact that I was so involved in my business when my son was born that I couldn't ever devote that I didn't ever devote time to my son, and that led nor did I devote time to my wife, and that led my wife to divorcing me. And he said, this is really affecting me now because I got remarried and I'm about to have another son. And I told the men's group this, that I really didn't want to repeat the pattern of neglecting my second son. And the group said, well, have you talked to your wife about how you feel? And he said, no, I don't think that would be really appropriate. And the group pressured me and said, talk to her. And so, and he talked to his wife, and his wife said, go ahead, John, do what you wish to do, and I will support you. And he said, but I really can't because I have all these legal contracts with my career. I can't get out of them. And the group would not take that for an answer. And they said, try to get out of them, minimize them, do what you can. If you want to take care of your son, take care of your son. And he said, I ultimately decided to do that. The group confronted me and said, you earn money, but what you're saying to us is what you own owns you. So who owns what exactly? And are you really free? And he said, I took that to heart, and I undid my contracts to the best degree I could. And as I was having this hour-plus discussion with this guy, I had just come back from my first book tour, and this guy comes up to our table. I've been on TV a lot, and says, could I have your autograph? And I go up to reach for to give him an autograph, and he looks really awkwardly at me and says, actually, I wanted his autograph, the guy I was talking to. And so John just quickly gave his autograph and handed it back, and I realized that the speed with which he gave the autograph back to him, that he must be pretty well known, and I did not have a TV at the time. And so I said, I don't have a TV, but obviously you're well known. Who are you? And he said, I'm just John, the guy that you've been talking to for the last hour. Let's keep it that way. And I pressed him, and he said, all right, John Lennon. And because I didn't have a TV at the time, I just said, well, John Lennon, aren't you member of a singing group? And I actually felt very proud of myself that I knew that. And he said, yes. And I said, well, what's the name of the group? And he said, the Beatles. And I go, oh, well, that ignorant I was not. So, but the point that I got out of that was, here is a man with perhaps the most successful career in recent history. And he said, and when I asked him about how did he feel about raising his son, he said, raising my son Sean was the single most important and best decision of my life. I used to write a lot about what love is about, but I never knew what love was until I spent practically every waking minute thinking about and worrying about and caring for my son. That really taught me what love is, and I would never, put that this was the most important and best decision of my life. And so, what I came to understand from that is that what we need to do is to introduce to dads how much dad style is needed to be blended in the checks and balances of parenting with mom style, and how to teach our parents to communicate with each other so that every situation that comes up with our son and daughter, they figure out how dad style and mom style can be combined to raise their children the most effectively. And they need to do that partially by themselves and partially in front of the children at family dinner nights that are carefully constructed, so that the children understand how the parents are taking their best interests into consideration and therefore feel the love that derives from that.
Dr. Warren Farrell, we appreciate you being here on Carolina Focus. When we agreed to do this conversation, I wasn't sure if it was going to be trying to reach people who need to appreciate their dads or vice versa. And I think we've covered a little bit of both. Dr. Warren Farrell, we appreciate you being here on Carolina Focus. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. It's just a pleasure talking with you, Mark.